welcome to the now video series, Chat with Kat. I'm Kat Widder. I'm the Wellness Coordinator for Alamo Heights ISD. If this is the first video of ours that you're watching, please consider checking out the other ones that we've put out there. Joining the conversation with me today, though, is the amazing Dan St. Romain. Dan is the behavior consultant at Howard Early Childhood Center here in Alamo Heights ISD. Fun fact, this is my third year in the district, and it's only taken Dan and I 3 years and a pandemic to collaborate on something. So before we get going, let me just share a bit about Dan. These are things based on my personal experiences and my observations. So first, Dan is no doubt the most engaging public speaker I've ever had the pleasure of watching. Those of you that have seen him speak, you know what I'm talking about also. Secondly, Dan is a wealth of both energy and knowledge. He loves his work with our early childhood students, and our students and their families love him back. And finally, Dan has been in our district for 17 years, and unfortunately for us, he is retiring in a few weeks, which in the midst of all that's happening in our world, this has to be the weirdest time to retire. This isn't the last that we're going to see of him, though. He's currently publishing another book, and post AHISD time, he will be continuing consulting with teachers around the country. So I, for one, am ready to let Dan share what he's got on his mind. And I'd like to start, I think, with talking about the new normal that we are all experiencing.
Hi, Kat. Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm excited to be here and part of this series. I, of course, never expected this to be a virtual experience. I'm used to doing a lot of presentations, but this new virtual reality has sort of unearthed a lot of crazy in our lives. And for me, it's, you know, I feel like I relate to most of us in that our new normal is really about the fact that our rituals have been just sort of taken away from us. I'm a person, a creature of habit, like many of us. I like getting up in the morning. I have my breakfast shake. You know, I go through my routine, and there's a sense of comfort and safety in that. And now I get up and I'm like, okay, I'm having my shake, but I'm not going to work. Like, what do I do now? And I think that's what parents and people are struggling with right now, is the routines that we've had in place have all been sort of taken away from us. And so now we're scrambling around trying to find a new normal, or at least a temporary normal, based on our circumstances. You know, I think that the reason we like our rituals is because we can predict and we can anticipate. I think that's why kids are struggling so much, is when you have a ritual, you know what to expect. It's like, I know when I go in the kitchen, this is going to be there. I know that if I get in my car at this time, I can make it to my school at this time. The bell will ring. And so your brain can calm down. But the problem now with this new normal is that all those rituals have been changed. So when I get up in the morning, I'm like, okay, wait, what am I? Okay, wait, now I have decisions to make. Like I used to not, I would just get to school and say, okay, I don't remember making this shake. Where did this come from? Because I was very much used to going on autopilot and having those habits. Well, now I'm having to make a lot more decisions. And if routines are that important for adults, then Kat, you can only imagine what that's doing to our kids who also thrive on that routine. Have you found that your habits and patterns and rituals have been disrupted with this whole new world that we live in?
Absolutely. And for starters, I feel like right now I don't have any patterns and rituals. I was talking with my husband the other day, and he was asking the latest on my favorite podcast. And I was like, I don't listen to my podcast. And he's like, you listen to it every day. And I realized, oh no, I listen to the podcast on my commute to work and my commute from work. I don't have a commute now. So apparently in my brain, I'm not allowed to listen to my podcasts. You know, and then you were talking about your routines in the morning where you just blindly do these things, right? I would get my travel mug of coffee and then my giant water, and I would head out the door. I am sadly not drinking very much water because I don't need to leave the house. And so that's one of my routines that's disrupted, but absolutely. And as an adult, I am more aware of those routines than my kids. And so I have the luxury kind of picking up on the fact that, oh, I'm not drinking enough water because my routine is disrupted. I need to alter that. But our kids are not even aware that their routines are disrupted.
Well, and the problem with that, or at least one of the problems, so many parents will call me and say, I'm used to a certain degree of disruptive behaviors with my kids, but this is like nothing I've ever seen. What's going on? And one of the things I think it is important for us to understand is that novelty escalates behavior. When something is new or different, our brain goes into a higher state of alert because we're not sure what's coming. When we have those rituals, we calm down and we fall into a habit or an autopilot. Well, for kids, those rituals ground them. So now that, mom or dad is staying home, now that I'm not going to school, all of a sudden now I have decisions to make. And so what that does is it escalates the behavior of kids. For example, if the bus is leaving at a certain time, there's an angst for, I've got to get my backpack ready. I've got to be on there because that bus is leaving. Like the decision is made for me because the routine is in place. But now that the bus is not coming, well, maybe I don't need to get out of bed. But if I don't need to get out of bed, well, then mom's going to get me. So this disruption in our routine has really escalated the behavior of kids, which has created a lot of tension in the whole house. So disruption has created a lot of problems because our habits now have been put to the wayside, and we're having to re-navigate, or we're having to navigate what to do in the absence of those habits that we're used to.
As you're talking about disruption, I think a lot of us can hyper focus on the disruption, right? And the things that are happening. But I do feel like we have some opportunities there. The disruption is getting things to a place where we can look at it differently. And so maybe we can talk about some opportunities that we have with all this disruption.
That's a really good point, because in times of change, we have the opportunity to change our patterns. I always talk about a phrase that I learned many years ago, and it's this idea that awareness leads to choice. When you are not aware of a habit that you have, you can't change it. So, for example, if I in the household am constantly calling my children out, stop that, son, pick up your clothes. If I get into a strong habit of doing that, a lot of times I go on autopilot and I'm not even aware that I'm doing it. It's become so habitual to me that I am blind to seeing it. The nice thing about change is change helps us with awareness. When I start to become aware of what I'm doing, then I can change those habits. So now all of a sudden, and I'll just give you my example, as a parent, because of this disruption, my wife and I have not always been in the house together at the same time. She taught for a number of years. I'm teaching. Well, she retired last year, and then of course I'm retiring this year, and we're getting sort of an example of what's going on in our household right now, in terms of what we think our future will look like, because now 24/7 we are both in the house together. So I've become acutely aware of the fact that I spend a lot of time on my computer. Never really noticed that before, but now I'm like, I've noticed, because my rituals have changed, that my wife and I live in the same house, but to some degree we have separate existences. That's not a bad thing. We still love each other. We get along. The problem is, now that I'm aware of that, I need to make a more conscious effort to change that. So what's nice about the change in our routines is it brings awareness to things. And with awareness comes choice. So now we have the opportunity to establish new habits. So for example, with my kids, we had gotten out of the habit of eating together. And that was something we used to do a lot of. But once the kids started getting into sports and doing other things, we sort of went in our separate directions and we all functioned in the same household, but we didn't have as much time. Well, now we're becoming aware of those things. So now I can say, all right, guys, tonight, I know we're all doing separate things. Let's have dinner together. And so with awareness, we now have the opportunity to change our habits. Are there any habits, Kat, that you've become aware of that you maybe weren't aware of before? And you're like, I never realized this, but since the change, I've discovered.
I feel like I am inundated with awareness right now that with all of the time that we have on our hands, I have become aware of so many things, almost to the point that it can be paralyzing sometimes, that I really, wow, I do this, 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 and this. I don't load the dishwasher. Like that. I mean, that's such a silly thing. But I think my husband's become aware of it. And so have I, because we're always here now. We have just a ton of dishes all the time, and I will just put it in the sink. And that is an awareness that has come up that is causing a little bit of tension, because it's a habit that I established at some point. I don't know when, because I think for a lot of us, I love that you said choice can lead to new habits, because I think we believe a lot of times that habits just kind of became. And so now I have a choice. I became aware that this is a bad habit of mine, that the dishwasher is right next to the sink. I can just put it in there. So now I'm aware that I do that. And now I have the choice to do something a little different. So absolutely, I am full of awareness right now.
Yes. And the question that comes out of that is then, how do we even start or begin to establish new habits? If we're aware of a habit and we know we don't like it, how can we change that? So I work with a lot of families on a couple of very specific suggestions. One of the triggers for behavior is communication patterns. And so I tell people, if you're aware, for example, that in your household, you're not talking enough, or we're watching too much electronics, or we're yelling too much, or any number of things, the number one way to change those communication patterns is through open and honest discussion. Unfortunately, one habit that I think a lot of parents get into with their children and with their significant other is, well, if I just ignore it, it'll go away. For example, if you as a parent, or if I as a parent yell too much, it's a lot easier to never have that discussion and never even broach the subject than to say, Michael, you know what I realized? I yell a lot. But here's the problem. If you don't have those open and honest discussions, you can't ever change the pattern. So one of the things I tell people to do is, while the pandemic is going on, this is a good time to establish, what is the communication like in your household? Is there a lot of yelling? Is there no communication? Are there good, honest discussions? And once you discover that, then you can try to change those patterns in a more healthy way by addressing them, sitting down and talking to your significant other, or talking to your child, saying, you know what I realized? I realized that sometimes we get mad and we just start arguing. We need to talk about how we can change it, because I don't like yelling, and I am certain you don't like it when I yell. So those open, honest discussions are important. But I will tell you, Kat, that timing is everything when it comes to having these discussions to change patterns. You can't change behaviors in the middle of crisis. And unfortunately, a lot of our families right now are in a perpetual state of crisis. So they're thinking, I don't know how to even address this because when I'm always elevated and there's always yelling, it doesn't seem like a good time. And I would say, there's not. In terms of there's not a good time when there's always a state of crisis. But if you're going to change those patterns, it's going to have to be at periods where you're all calm. Because our opportunity here is to really alter your communication patterns so that you can strengthen relationships. And when you talk about opportunities, Kat, I think that's the biggest opportunity we have right now is during this time of change to say, how can I strengthen the relationships in our household? Because I can guarantee you, Kat, if we can change those relationships for the better, it's going to have a positive impact on the behaviors of everyone involved.
I also think that like maybe the second biggest thing we have going for us right now is time. That's part of that opportunity is we have the time right now to be establishing the awareness of what's going on in our home and with our families and with our own behavior as parents. And then we have the time and the opportunity to actually act on that, to make different choices. I do feel like I want to address the fact that there are plenty of families out there that it's not just a perpetual state of crisis because of a pandemic. There's a crisis going on in their homes financially. They're worried about food. They're worried about shelter, maybe mental health issues going on in the home, addiction. And so in terms of changing, it's not as easy as, well, I'm becoming aware that these things are happening. But maybe talk a little bit about a family in perpetual crisis. What can they do with an opportunity like we have right now?
That is such a good point because all of our families that we're talking about are in very different places. And sometimes I get concerned when I hear educators, not just in our district, across the country going, well, it's easy. Here's this packet. And I'm like, okay, no, we can't do that because our families are in very, very different places. And so one of the things that I talk to families about is this idea of ebb and flow. If I were to go into any household, whether it is a single parent, whether it is a two-parent family with a whole lot of kids, and I observe throughout the whole day, we go through an ebb and a flow of calm and escalated behavior. Now, it may look different, but we have an ebb and we have a flow, meaning there are times during the day where tensions are high and you can feel it and cut it with a knife. There are times where frustrations are high. But then there are other times, Kat, where a calm washes over things. Now, that may look different. In other words, in your household, your calm and my calm in my house might look completely different. But there are periods where there is less yelling, there's less arguing, there's less frustration. And those are the times to capitalize on having those discussions. So I tell people when my children were younger, and we have 4 boys, when they were younger, I knew that first thing in the morning, trying to get off to school, there was no discussion happening. It was, we're in survival. Daddy's doesn't want to kill you. Let's get our shoes on. And I don't mean to be sarcastic about that, but my tension and my wife's tension was so high, that was not the time to say, you are not putting on your shoes. That was not the time to change behavior. But do you know what's so funny is later in the day, usually right after dinner, my kids loved me again. They didn't love me in the morning. You see, when tensions are high, it was, you're the worst parent ever, yelling, screaming, whatever. But then right after dinner, it was, that was a really good meal, or Dad, let's go get the mail, or let's watch TV, like they loved me again. And Kat, I feel like the viewers can relate to that. It feels like sometimes that we have two different children. The children that absolutely love us and adore us. And you're like, okay, that's the child that we bore. That's, pure love in a little body, or a teenager. And there are other times where you're just like, I don't recognize this child at all. Where are these behaviors coming from? Well, know that that ebb and flow of behavior is normal. But I will tell you, Kat, that during times of external crisis, those mood swings and those behaviors get much wider. So in the household, we're seeing much more exaggerated behaviors from our kids. So first thing I would tell all our viewers is know that's normal. We're doing the best we can given the circumstances. But going back to your question of, so what do you feel like we should do when we're always in a state of crisis? I would say find the calmest periods during the day and capitalize on that. So when my children are younger, right after we ate and everyone was in a good mood, then I could say, boy, guys, y'all were really upset this morning when I said we need to get going. Now that my boys are teenagers, I find, oddly enough, it's right before they go to bed. I don't know why, but right before their bed, there's a lot less tension in the house. And I think it's because we've had time to sort of get away from each other. And the boys go in their room and do their own thing. We do our own thing. And now it's actually pretty late at night before they go to bed. My son will just come in and say, hey, Dad, tomorrow can I XYZ? And I'll say, sure. But hold on, Micah, I had a question. Remember earlier when Mom said to put your clothes away? You were really frustrated. And he just looks at me. He's like, Dad, it's no big deal. Micah, I know it's not a big deal, but and all of a sudden we can have an open, honest discussion. No matter how much crisis a family might be dealing with, or a parent might be dealing with, you have to look in your household and say, throughout the day, from the time I get up until the time we go to bed, where are the calmer periods where I can swoop in and we can have those discussions to try to create some change? So looking for the calmer periods, no matter how much crisis a family might be dealing with.
I have a couple things to add with that. So first of all, when we were talking earlier about awareness, and I'm feeling like I'm absolutely flooded with awareness right now, that is one of the opportunities. So just go piggybacking off of what you're saying, you have opportunities right now with all the time we have on our hands to really think about where those periods of calm are happening, because we don't have to actually have the rituals and routines going on to figure these things out, right? I can remember back a few months ago when we had our normal routine of school, and I can just be thinking right now, where were those periods of calm? So I think that's a good point to add. And also with everything that you're talking about, I know our community is very smart, but I do also want to remind everyone that the reason we focus a lot of our attention on parents and parenting is that that's the one thing we have control over. I don't have control over how my child decides to act, but I do have control over what I do in those moments. And so that's why we do focus a lot of attention on our parenting. I wish sometimes I could snap my fingers and my kids could do everything that I think that they should. But really I can't. So I have to focus on my contribution to those interactions as a parent. And I absolutely love the suggestions you're giving, especially when we are all in crisis right now. This pandemic is really screwing everything up for everybody. So looking at the situation through that lens and thinking how can I do things a little different is really important. And I had one other thing I wanted to add. You were talking about that our kids love us and sometimes don't. But I also wanted to add that the flip side is true too, that during those periods, our kids are feeling sometimes like, I don't know if my mom even likes me right now. And then, oh, she loves me again. So that right there, I think, is a really good example to hold on to remind ourselves why we alter our own behavior. I don't want my kid ever thinking that I don't love them because I was like, get your shoes on, like we need to go to school. I don't want them feeling that way. But stress really does a number on us, and so we have to be acutely aware of how our behavior affects our children also. So we are nearing the end of our time together, and so I just wanted to know if there was anything else that you wanted to add.
I go back to what you talked about at the very beginning of this, where we have opportunities. So we've talked about the idea or the opportunity of establishing new habits. We've talked about how our goal is to change the communication patterns so that we can alter relationships. And then this last piece of when we're feeling like we're in crisis all the time, what is the opportunity there? It's to shift the emotional climate in the house. The goal is we want more calm rather than periods of, if you will, crazy washing over the household. So in keeping that in mind, the last thing I would say is I think it's very important for families to prioritize. Now, I am all over continuous learning. I'm all over the positive educational experience that I think all districts are trying to create. But cognition cannot be more important than mental health. It just can't. Our kids are going to learn, but they're going to remember, more importantly, during this time of crisis and during this pandemic, the emotional climate more so than any lesson a teacher might be giving us to do. So I've had so many families talk to me saying, I'm such a bad mom. And I'm like, why? Well, we had this lesson and we only got to this one piece of it. And I say, give yourself grace, as Dr. Bashara talks about, and cut yourself some slack. Know that you know your family better than we do. So families need to do what they feel is best for their family. And if that means putting that lesson aside for that time because there are more important things to worry about, then you need to feel comfortable in doing that. I tell people, remember that whole carpe diem piece, which is live in the moment. Do you know where adults tend to live, Kat? They live in this place of, well, but what if we don't get this bill paid? Well, what if this doesn't happen? Well, what if my husband? And all of that is in the future. Well, I think one of the best ways to survive this pandemic is to say, I'm going to, rather than live in the future, I'm going to work on the emotional climate of my household right now. And the last thing I would say is focus on the good. I know it's hard, but I know I have the problem, Kat, of getting these little earworms and obsessiveness of, but, and that completely consumes me. But there's good in everything. And so what I would encourage people to do is, I don't care what it is, find the good in this pandemic, whether that's I am having more time with my kids, whether that's I'm able to breathe a little more where I don't have to worry about the car because we're not really driving it. Whatever it is, focusing on the good, because what I'd rather them do is focus on the positive aspects. And I know that's hard, Kat, especially when there's a lot of crisis going on, but trying to find some good in all of the difficult times that we're living in. So I would just end on that positive note of prioritizing and then making sure that you are focusing on the good things that are happening, even if they're small things, focusing on that rather than focusing on the other things that unfortunately can consume us in these troubling times.
Well, one good thing for me is that in this pandemic, I learned how to make banana bread. Never had made it before, always let the bananas go bad and I would toss them in the garbage. And so now I know what to do with them. And it was really good, by the way. So I want to thank you so much, Dan, for sharing your knowledge with all of us. And also, because I don't even honestly know if you and I are going to get to see each other before you officially retire. I want to wish you well in all of your endeavors beyond our school district. We have been so lucky to have you. And today is a beautiful day, so we're going to carpe diem today, right?
I appreciate you inviting me to do this. I feel so fortunate. I've worked with Alamo Heights for the last 17 years, and this is not the end. Even though I'm retiring, I'll be coming back, definitely volunteering and working with the district on various fronts. So I feel very fortunate and blessed to have worked with the district, and this is not the last time you're seeing me. So thank you for inviting me. I want to say how much I appreciate these chat with cats, because I think they're opening up discussions that need to be had, and they're absolutely wonderful. So I appreciate you inviting me to be part of it.
Well, thank you for joining us. Have an awesome day.
You too. Bye-bye, Kat.